Keto sugar substitutes. Which are the good ones? Everyone loves sugar. We are genetically conditioned to love sugar. This taste of sweet is very attractive. But then when we get too much, as in processed sugar, then we get insulin resistance and we gain weight and we become diabetic and really sick. So then they come up with these sugar substitutes. Some of them can help you lose weight and they can help you stay in ketosis, but are those the main things that we should be concerned with, or are there others that are equally or more important? We're going to talk about all those things so that you get the full picture coming right up. I'm Dr. Ekberg. I'm a holistic doctor and a former Olympian. If you want to truly master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss anything. The majority of people in the Western world are overweight, and keto and low carb and intermittent fasting is the biggest promise to resolve that most people have seen. So in the wake of that, people still want to have something sweet once in a while or in their coffee or certain desserts. So which sweeteners are okay? And keto is one of the most powerful ways of losing weight and reversing insulin resistance. But at the same time, keto can be a little bit oversimplified and it can turn into a religion as if ketosis was the only thing that mattered. We're going to evaluate 16 different sweeteners, sucrose or sugar, table sugar being one of them. So there are 15 other sweeteners that we're going to compare it to. And we are going to look at keto, whether it keeps you in or kicks you out of ketosis, whether it's keto approved. But we're also going to look at how it does as far as glucose, insulin resistance. And then we're going to look at a couple more things that most people don't talk about. We're going to talk about the biome. What is that? That is the sum total of all the bacteria, good and bad, that live in your gut. So you have somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 trillion cells in your body, human cells. But then you have an equal or slightly larger number of bacterial cells, of parasites, of protozoa. You have a whole jungle of life forms, and one of the most important things for your health is to maintain balance in that jungle. A lot of wise people have said that you are only as healthy as your gut, and the bacteria in the gut is what determines how healthy that is. It determines your levels of neurotransmitters, your digestion, whether you're prone to bloating, if you have constipation, and hundreds of others. The more they look into the biome, the more they realize that that might be the key to health. So we don't want to take that lightly. And then the final category we're going to look at is toxicity. Is this a toxic thing? So yes, it's nice to lose weight, it's nice to reverse insulin resistance, but if we load up on toxins, if we poison our brain, if we poison the liver, if we destroy the kidneys in the process, then is that really what we were looking for? So keep toxicity in mind as sort of a measurement that if you like to make it to retirement, then that would be an important factor. Don't want to be too harsh, but I just want to make the point that we want to look at several different factors here to determine if these things are good for us or not just a single one. So let's dig right into it here, and let's look at aspartame, sucralose, saccharin, and acesulfame potassium. These are the most popular artificial sweeteners, and because they are cheap and they are stable and the industry likes them, they are in thousands and thousands of different foods. They are non-caloric. They have no impact on blood glucose. So as far as keto, then aspartame would be okay, sucralose would be okay, saccharin and acesulfame potassium would be okay. Then we look at things like xylitol, erythritol, maltitol. There are many others. They all end in "all," which means OL, which means that they are sugar alcohols. That means that they have a chemical group on them that prevents them from being digested by humans, and they taste really nice and sweet. They're not as sweet as these guys, because these can be like hundreds of times sweeter. These are in the neighborhood of equal sweetness to sugar, and they often taste quite good. They're more natural sweetness compared to sugar. It's more like we're used to the flavor. Humans can't digest them. So therefore, they're okay for keto. They have a negligible impact. Now, we look at sucrose, honey, agave, high fructose corn syrup, coconut sugar. And all of them are sugars, so they will have an impact on blood sugar. They will kick you out of ketosis. They contain calories, etc. So that would be a big red X for all of them. And then we get into the alternative but more natural, because these are made in test tubes. They're made from toxic components. But down here we have natural substances with similar properties. So we have stevia and monk fruit, and those would be definitely okay. We might want to put a tiny little question mark on some of these, because anything that tastes sweet could potentially create a little bit of an insulin response. But as far as keeping you out of ketosis, then none of these would probably have enough to kick you out. So we're going to get them a green. Then we have something called glycerol or glycerin, and it is the same word root as in triglyceride. So it's a natural substance. It is something that the body uses all the time. It's a backup fuel. It has a sweet taste, but it's not a carbohydrate or a fat. So it has calories, it is a fuel, but it's like it's its own thing, and it is an okay one. When the body makes triglycerides and then it burns off the fat, it burns off the fatty acid, and it keeps the glycerin, and it can turn that into sugar. So it can generate blood sugar, and that's where a lot of the blood sugar comes from when people are in ketosis. Another interesting one is chicory root. This is something that is almost 100% fiber. It tastes sweet, but it can't be broken down by humans, and it is definitely okay. It has a little bit of similar properties to the sugar alcohols, but we're going to look at that also in a second. So as far as ketosis, then it's pretty clear cut. The ones that the synthetic ones and the sugar alcohols are okay. The non-caloric sweeteners are okay, but anything with calories, anything that's extracted from a food basically is going to change blood sugar. It's going to kick you out of ketosis for sure. But then let's look at how they differ also. So glucose, there is no glucose impact from any of these guys. Xylitol, there is nothing here. But now that we start looking at the sucrose, honey, agave, high fructose corn syrup, and coconut sugar, now we need to look at how are they different. So sucrose is 50% fructose and 50% glucose. The glucose raises blood sugar, but the fructose hardly raises blood sugar at all. So therefore, let's put 2 X's in that it's 2 times bad for blood sugar with sucrose. Honey agave has 80% fructose, so they have a less impact on blood glucose. So we're just going to put a single X here. High fructose corn syrup varies, but it generally also has more fructose than glucose, so it also gets 1X. And that's why a lot of these have been promoted as alternatives to honey, the agave, the high fructose corn syrup, because people thought that the glucose impact was the only way that they did damage. So they say, oh, look, here's a better sweetener because it has a lower glycemic index. But we're going to look at that and see why that's not the whole story. Coconut sugar is very, very close to sucrose. There's been some studies that suggest that it has a lower glycemic index, and others have suggested that it's exactly the same as sucrose. So we're going to give it 2 X's there as well. All of these are essentially no impact on blood sugar, so we're good there. So far it's pretty much the same pattern, but we're starting to distinguish the differences between the natural, the food sugars, that they have different properties. So now let's look at insulin resistance. Here, these are going to get a check mark. These are going to get check marks. But here, we're going to start looking at this again. So as far as insulin resistance, there's 2 ways that you can create insulin resistance. And one is by raising blood sugar to require an insulin response. And that's what the glucose response does. So we're still going to get a double here because it has 2 different ways. Sucrose has 2 different ways of creating insulin resistance. Honey has the same 2 sugars, but it has more of the fructose. But the fructose creates insulin resistance basically by jamming up the liver. It overloads the liver because fructose can only be processed in the liver. So from that point of view, there's not so much impact from the glucose aspect, but there's even more in terms of insulin resistance. So we're even going to give this a triple insulin resistance. And we're going to do the same thing for agave and high fructose corn syrup. Coconut sugar, again, is going to behave very much like regular sugar. So some people think, oh, well, you know, it's brown, it's natural. Yes, it has a few minerals, it has a few vitamins, it's a little more natural. It's sort of like turbinado sugar or demerara sugar or something, where it still has some traces of minerals in there. But whatever they call it, a sugar is a sugar is a sugar is a sugar. All right? These guys down here, as far as insulin resistant, they are okay. Now let's look at the biome. Let's talk about which ones will feed bacteria and which will maybe feed the wrong kinds of bacteria. So again, if it has no nutrients, it's not going to feed the biome either. So we can exclude the artificial, the synthetic ones, we can exclude right away. The xylitol, however, these sugar alcohols, the bacteria, some of the bacteria, especially the pathogenic ones, especially the ones that you don't want, they tend to get fed by these sugar alcohols. And some of them get fed more, some of them are absorbed in different places, but basically they still feed the bacteria. So here, X's for the biome. And here we want to also understand that some people say, oh, well, erythritol, that's a better one. It gets absorbed sooner in the digestive tract. It never reaches the bowel. But there's 2 places, there's 2 regions where you have bacteria. Normally, bacteria are only going to be in the bowel, in the large intestine, which is the last portion of the bowel. But if you have a problem with your biome, then the bacteria tend to move from the large intestine and back up into the small intestine. And now you have something called SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth. And the people that have really big problems with bloating that gets painful and uncomfortable, bloating and gassiness, they're the ones who not only have the bacteria where they're supposed to be in the large intestine, but who also have them in the small intestine. And now, it doesn't matter if the erythritol doesn't make it to the large intestine because it's still going to be around to feed the bacteria in the small intestine. And that's where you have the issues, typically if you have issues. Sucrose, honey, agave, high fructose corn syrup, these are just different combinations of sugar. They're all going to feed the biome, to feed the pathogenic, to feed the wrong part of the biome. The stevia, monk fruit, glycerol, glycerin, they are going to be okay. And we could put a little bit of a question mark on the chicory root because it is a fiber, and fibers can be having some similar effects, but it's going to be a fraction of what you're going to find with the sugar alcohols. The sugar alcohols will tell you on the package that this product will cause laxative effects. It may cause diarrhea if you consume a significant amount of these. So the significant amount is different for different people. For some people, it's a couple of tablespoons or 3 or 4 tablespoons, and for other people, it might be a teaspoon or 2. So a lot of people are sensitive to these, and some people who are really sensitive might have a little trouble with the chicory root, but it's not going to be anywhere near the problems with this one. Now let's talk about toxicity. Do you want to live to see retirement? Then it's not just about losing weight. It's not just about how you look. It's what your organs look like on the inside. And here is where these are some of the most potent neurotoxins that we know. They're right up there with lead and arsenic and margarine and things like that. And I would put probably a triple X on the aspartame because it has so many different toxic substances. It breaks down into wood alcohol, it breaks that down into formaldehyde, it's an excitotoxin, it kills off your liver and your kidneys and your brain. It's really just not a good idea. The others have various different degrees, and I wouldn't recommend them for anything in the world, but they're probably not quite as bad as the aspartame if you want to rank them. Xylitol, erythritol, maltitol, they are typically considered natural substances, but all of them are industrially produced now. They are produced through various chemical processes. So let's just put a little question mark on these because it depends. Xylitol, for example, is called birch sugar because it supposedly occurs naturally in birches, and that's where they started deriving it, but that's not where they get it from anymore. Sucrose, honey, agave, high fructose corn syrup, most of these are relatively natural. So honey obviously is a very natural product, and it even has some good healthy benefit. It has some nutrients, it has some properties to it. So here I would have to say check depending on how the sugar is made, but a good organic turbinado sugar is still basically a natural product. Honey, I would even put 2 check marks as far as natural. Agave is usually made from cactus sugar, but depending on how it's processed, we might want to be careful. High fructose corn syrup is a very, very synthetic product, and it has been shown to be laced with various toxins, including mercury. So I would probably put a couple of X's on that. Coconut sugar is generally a healthy sugar, so I'd put that up there with a good quality sugar, if you want to call it such a thing. Stevia, monk fruit, glycerin, glyceride, chicory root, I would say are, for the most part, okay. You want to be careful though, because with stevia and monk fruit primarily, it depends on how they process it, and it depends on what they mix it with. So stevia itself is a plant, and then they extract it into a concentrated white powder. And then because the powder is so concentrated, they usually dilute it with something. And oftentimes they dilute it with these sugar alcohols, or they dilute it with like an inert powder, like an inulin. So it could be if you don't get the pure kind, it could be a mix of these different things. So I would recommend either a liquid stevia or a concentrated powder stevia. And you'll know because one of these tiny little bottles would have about 500-600 servings. Same thing with the monk fruit. It's even a little bit more concentrated than the stevia. So if you find a little bottle with 500 servings, then that would be the kind of stevia or monk fruit that you want to get. So out of these, the only one that I would recommend for health would be the ones at the bottom. They are natural, they'll keep you in ketosis, they have no impact on blood sugar or insulin resistance, they have no impact on the biome, and they are not toxic. So the synthetic ones here, they look pretty good on paper all the way up to here, but the toxicity aspect is so important in my mind. A lot of people kind of brush over that, but being a holistic doctor and seeing what this stuff does to people, I can't caution it strongly enough. So even though there's a bunch of green check marks, that last aspect means that it's a poison that you want to keep out of your body. Sugar is not a poison, but for health purposes, for all the things that you're trying to accomplish, it is not a good idea. The sugar alcohols, they can help you and they may be okay in moderation. So if you don't like the taste of anything else, but you find that, the xylitol, it's not so bad, in coffee, for example, and you just use a teaspoon or 2 teaspoons a day and you don't notice anything bad with it, then I wouldn't worry about those. I think any of the sugar alcohols would be okay then. But if you notice any kind of bloating, then that means that that's not a good thing for you, and you want to start looking at your biome and doing the things that you can as much as possible. So if you'd like to learn more about insulin resistance, ketosis, toxicity, holistic health, etc., we have a whole library for you to learn from. If you enjoyed this content, make sure that you subscribe and hit that notification bell so that you don't miss anything. See you in the next video.